prisoners from the waterless pit. Return to your fortress, you prisoners of hope. Even now I announce that I will restore twice as much to you. This is the word of the Lord. And it is also good news. Let me place this in kind of the historical section of where we are in the unfolding story of that is the backdrop of Scripture. So you have, in Israel's history, you have in the beginning, they are formed as a people, they are in Egypt. So we'll talk about that as a low point here. So they are, for generations, holding on to hope in slavery in Egypt, that God has not forgotten them, that God will one day come and rescue them. And he does on Passover. He rescues his people, he delivers them across the Red Sea and into the wilderness for 40 years. So it kind of, it was up, but then it was flat, and there's even some serious debates going on. Are we really better now in the wilderness than we were in Egypt? But then Joshua's generation comes after 40 years. They cross another body of water, this time the Jordan River, and then they go into the land and they settle there. And then there's a time of Judges, so things kind of dip a little bit again. But after that time of Judges, there's a King Saul, which is more of a lateral move than anything else. But then David. David into Solomon is the peak of the golden age of Israel. That is a time of peace, of prosperity, of growth. And then after Solomon, so if you're counting, 2 kings, literally 2 generations, and then the kingdom splits and divides. There's 2 separate claims to the throne. There's the north and the south. Those in the north settle in Samaria, and they build their own temple and begin their own practices of worship, and then they're conquered by Assyria. The southern tribes hold on a little bit longer until eventually Babylon comes and sends them and takes them into exile. Not only do they come, they besiege the city. They kill indiscriminately, including children and infants. They carry the best and brightest. People like Daniel were taken as, you have potential. We're going to teach you the ways of Babylon. You're very lucky to have been rescued from this backwater god into the god of Babylon. He's castrated, and then he is living and serving under the king's court for his whole life. Jeremiah is the one who saw this coming, saw it happen, and then wrote Lamentations as he looked at Jerusalem in its former glory and what had been lost. Zechariah, well, let me continue with Jeremiah, one more point of relevance. Jeremiah in Jeremiah 29 wrote a letter to the exiles. And what he said to them is basically, build homes, have babies, this really scandalous line of seek the prosperity of Babylon, for when it flourishes, you too will flourish. But put down roots. And then that's for I know the plans I have for you, Jeremiah 29:11, which you've probably seen in Hobby Lobby. The larger backdrop of that statement is the news of you will spend 3 generations in occupation and suffering. And your job is to seek the prosperity of your enemy, which you don't see as much at Hobby Lobby. So, what you have now after that 70 years, that they're watching it down. They've got a clock going. They say the 70 years is coming up. That's when Zechariah comes onto the scene. And so he comes in and says to the people of God, I've got, what I'm calling it's a optimistic realism. Maybe we could put it that way. I put something else in my notes, but I can't remember what it was, which begs the question, why do you keep notes then? But there's this resiliency to it. There's on the one hand, you can see it in this passage I just read. On the one hand, God will, through the line of David, establish a kingdom that will stretch over every corner of the earth. And since we now know we live on a sphere, that means the whole earth. That the whole earth will be called unto, that the king of Israel will come in, will establish a peace. All the instruments of war will be gone forever, taken away. And the God of Israel, through the line of David, will establish a king. And I don't want to spoil who that king is till the end. But you, in the meantime, will go home, and you go back to Jerusalem, and you will begin to rebuild your lives from the rubble that you'll find there. So there's a now and not yet to it. The now is, if you seek me, I will be found. Your grandparents' generation, they rejected me, and I finally turned my back on them. But you will be a different generation. You will seek me. I'll be found by you. You will rebuild my home, and I will move back in. So there is a go home. There is the far-off promise of God sending a king to establish peace over all the earth. But for now, go home and begin to rebuild your life. It would be like, if you want to imagine, in occupied France and during World War II. And imagine at the end of World War II, after the Nazis are defeated, the Soviet Union claims France. So this is ours now. Just like it claimed East Germany, it's like, no, we want more. They take France too. They take Paris. And those who lived in Paris before the war, who had fled as exiles, fled France, came home, they would say, on the one hand, I'm home. On the other hand, I barely recognize this as home. The rubble, the destruction, the place that I grew up in, I barely recognize it because of the scars on the land. And on top of that, while the Nazis are gone, the Soviets are now here. The Red Army now occupies France, and as good as it is to be home, it doesn't feel like home. It still feels like a foreign land, even though parts of it are familiar. That's sort of what Zechariah is telling is going to happen to the Israelites. You will return home, you rebuild, but what you long for, the peace you long for, is still in the future, still in the distant future. So hold on, you prisoners of hope. You who are entrapped, who have made many generations of holding on to this hope. Ezra and Nehemiah came a couple decades after Zechariah. They're the ones that rebuilt the city wall. They're the ones who began the project of rebuilding the temple. But as Zechariah said, yes, the time of Babylon is over, but now the Persians are going to come. And it's still not going to feel like home, and it's not going to feel like home for a long time. That's the message of Zechariah. That's why I call it a optimistic realism, because it's realistic in the sense that, yes, you are going home, but it's not going to be what you hoped for. And it's written to a people where hope is becoming harder and harder to hold on to. And so what God calls his people that are receiving this message from Zechariah, he refers to them, you prisoners of hope. Which, can we just say, what an odd image. Prisoner of hope. What does it mean to be imprisoned by hope? It's called juxtaposition. You put two things side by side that you don't anticipate to be there. Paradoxically, you're a prisoner, but it's a prison of hope. Like, yeah, but it's still a prison, right? So what does it mean to be a prisoner of hope? Let me begin with talking about hope. Hope is powerful. Hope is necessary to live well. You cannot experience peace without also experiencing hope. Joy requires hope, especially joy that transcends circumstances. Doing what is right, even though there's consequences that come with it, or forfeited gains by doing what is right, you have to have a hope that sustains you as you endure suffering and move towards that hope. Hope is what Ezra and Nehemiah's generation, Ezra, who sparked a revival and return to God, they built the wall, they began the project of rebuilding the temple that one day Jesus would cleanse. There was hope and resiliency that said, even though my town is in rubble, even though I've experienced a national and cultural catastrophe, even now I will begin to join in the rebuilding, because I know the rebuilding is seen by God and one day will be rewarded by God, who will come and bring the peace that we're working towards. Hope. Hope is required for us to live a good life. We have to fit our life into a story of God's redemptive purposes and blessing. But I also understand hope can lead to pain, suffering. Imagine, or I tell my kids, wake up, we're going to Disneyland. And they say, yay, and we get in the car, and then I take them to a dentist. And I say, this is a Disney-themed dentist, that's what I meant. And they're like, I see, we go to a local orthodontist who, it feels a little bit like walking into a dentist office inside of Disneyland. So I said, oh, that's what we meant. What they would say is, waking up in the day and telling us we're going to go to the dentist that day is a disappointment. I don't want to go to the dentist. But getting our hopes up and then leaving them to fall down is far more painful to us. Even though there's a moment of elation and joy, it's far more painful to have our hopes raised only to have them crash down, which is Zechariah is mitigating that, saying, yes, your hope will be realized. The 70-year thing, it's on a longer timeline from that, so readjust your expectations. Because a hope denied, a hope given and taken away is more painful than never having hope in the first place. So I understand that hope being described as a prison is how some people feel. That I feel like this hope I've had, this hope that my faith once gave me, has led to disappointment after disappointment. How do I get out of the prison of hope? Well, Jesse, would you show them the map on how to escape from the prison of hope? So if you want to get out of the prison of hope, there's some guards, the only human that are patrolling around. And if you want to get out, when a guard passes by, just say, I've had enough, I quit, I'm done. This is too much, it's broken me. I'm tired of hoping. He will give you the key of despair is what it's called. Sometimes some people call the key of quitting, but I just think despair is a better way to put it. So that will unlock the door. Just give him back the key. Then you're going to go through the way out of the prison is a tunnel that goes underground, and it's called the Tunnel of Cynicism. And as you walk through it, as you're passing through the Tunnel of Cynicism, there's some things scrawled on the wall that you won't see until your eyes fully adjust to the darkness, but it's helpful as you're walking through the tunnel of despair, tunnel of cynicism, sorry, the key of despair, as you're walking through there. And it's helpful to, as your eyes adjust to the darkness, to read what's written in there. It says that, the weak won't inherit the earth. The meek don't inherit the earth. The strong inherit the earth. The strong take what's theirs. The easy way out is the way that brings comfort and happiness. Trust in, and then depending on the currency, we'll just say trust in the almighty dollar, that the economy is the most important thing in what governs and rules the world, and the sooner you understand it, the sooner you can benefit from it. Sometimes, in some cases, you'll find things, the problem with this country is, and then it'll list current leaders of different cities that serve the other political side, and so you'll see that there's already beginning to sow the seeds, which will be helpful later on in your journey of scapegoating and blaming other people. Other people's problems are not my responsibility. This idea that's reinforced all through there, that you've got to get what's yours because nobody's going to give it to you. You have to take it. So that's why the meek inheriting the earth is for the weak that aren't going to make it on the journey very far. And there'll be phrases that as you're in there, you'll know they're not true. You'll tell yourself these aren't true. You'll want to go back, but I just want to say, as your eyes adjust to the darkness and as you read them more and more, they'll start to make more sense. And then you'll come out and you'll enter into the forest of me and mine. This is a forest that is very competitive. There are other people. There's not a lot of resources in there. You've got to get ahead of everybody else if you want to make it on your journey. And so you have to enter into this world of competition. You have to differentiate yourself from your peers. You have to show that you want it more, that you're hungrier, that you perform better. And as you go through the force of me and mine, eventually you're going to arrive at the prosperous city. It's got a really fancy Latin name, status quo. And once you arrive at status quo, that you will find that you've, on the journey, learned the rules of cynicism, of despair, of differentiating yourself from others, of competition. That's going to serve you really, really well there. And once you get there, you'll look at the time you spent in the prison of hope, and you'll see it for what it is, a prison. And you will see it that it was nothing more than a foolish delusion, that it was a way of trying to keep the masses happy, to give them some kind of opiate so that they can tolerate the way that they're not prospering in the status quo, the city of status quo, but you will have escaped. I mean, imagine for a moment there's no God. Imagine that it's just us, that there really is nothing to put your hope in other than yourself, what you can do, what you can provide. History isn't going towards this future that is envisioned in Zechariah of justice and hope and peace and tears being wiped away and joy and this thing that we all know is possible, but we can't quite get there, even though governments promise it, even though marketing promises it to us, that it always seems to elude us. One of my favorite authors recently that I've been reading all his books, Andrew Root, he wrote a book called Evangelism in the Age of Despair. So I just want to close by talking about those two things. Evangelism, age of despair. Evangelism is a transliteration of a Greek word, which literally means good message. Angel, I don't know if you noticed that in evangelism is the word angel. Angel means messenger or message, and you means good. So just like Eucharist means the good grace. Evangelion, good news, is what we have. And so what Andrew Root argues in his book is we've confused evangelism with conversion. Evangelism is the announcement of good news. It's the pronouncement to the world, much like we just read in Zechariah, of the promise of God's return to us and the invitation to join with what God is doing in the same way that Ezra and Nehemiah did as they were building the wall and taking the words of Zechariah and saying, well, let's get to work, let's roll up our sleeves. And he writes that we forget that the evangelism is just telling the good news, just saying it and living it and embodying it to people in the age of despair. Let me show you a 4-year, and I know it's 2019 through 2023, but there's a larger trend on here as I walk over here to just make a minor adjustment to the thermostat. Let's get that air back and flowing. There it is. That sweet, sweet sound of air conditioning. Yet another form of grace. So, this is, over a 4-year span, a sign of rises of depression. And the line here in the bottom, this is the younger generation, the 18 to 44, went from having the lowest, fewest incidents of mental health struggles and depression to the highest. And one of the more alarming trends, one of the great mental health crises of our generation is the mental health of teenagers and of young adults. And what Andrew Root said is, it is best to understand that we live in sad times. We live in an age of grief, anxiety, and sadness. That we have what's his name? We have age of anxiety. Help me out. The author, yeah. Oh, this is great preaching right now. Yes, we live in an age of anxiety, but I think despair is a better label for it. Jonathan Haidt, that's what I was trying to think of. H-A-I-D-T. So
I think it is better to think of us to live in an age of despair than anxiety. And what Andrew Root argues in his book is the number one reason, the number one cause of despair is the fact that we just don't have meaningful friendships anymore. The way he puts it in his book is it's a lack of consolation. We have nobody to sit with us in our loss, in our grief, in our sorrow. The only people that listen to us, talk about those things, are therapists. And that the number one way for the church to announce the good news to the world is to sit and listen to the grief of our neighbor, to hear their sorrow, to be someone that can create space, hold that space. And you've probably heard of Pascal's wager. Louis Pascal, no? Well, let me tell it to you. The way I was told it was Pascal argued his wager was if you believe there's a God and you're wrong, there's not really any consequences to that because you'll cease to exist with the rest of us. If you don't believe in God and you're wrong, well, there might be severe consequences of that. So wager on whichever one leads to the best outcome in the end. But that's not what he said. What he said was, my wager is if you enter into your grief and suffering, you'll find God there. That if you give yourself in to confess what is happening inside of you, your grief and your loss, that you will find God in those spaces. I'm going to ask Krista if that's ever been her experience. That people in those moments expressing that those moments tend to be holy and sacred. Zechariah, to a grieving people, to people that had suffered the near erasure from the history, trying to rebuild their life, he gave the good news to them. God is coming to you. He is coming to you not on a war horse, this rise of the Assyrians conquered by the Babylonians conquered by the Persians and the Seleucids and then the Greeks and the Romans, and on the chain goes of dudes on horses with blood on their swords coming back victorious. And the image Zechariah gives is different. It's a guy, and one of the commentators said, it's like seeing the king come in an old pickup truck. It's a beast of burden. It's something associated with working folks, not warriors. And he's going to come and he's going to rid the world from its weapons. Keep working towards that peace, you prisoners of hope. Do not give up. Do not despair. And then, that person, you may have guessed already, was Jesus. That when Jesus came in to ascend to his throne, he came in to fulfill this prophecy so that Israel would know, here is your king, coming and entering in Jerusalem, triumphant and victorious. And the good news that we now look backwards to is that Jesus came, lived, died, resurrected, ascended to heaven, and sent his Spirit to us. And he promised that just as Zechariah's generation looked forward to the coming of the king, we now look forward to the return of the king. That Jesus will come back. That just as Ezra and Nehemiah worked to rebuild the wall and the temple, so too do we work towards the coming of his kingdom, towards justice, fairness, towards health, towards healing, towards the healing of the political rift in this country, to the racial rift in this country, to all the rifts, to the healing that we want and seek, until one day Christ comes home and says, enough, and brings the peace once and for all. The good news that your work, our work, is not in vain. The good news that when we need consolation, we can put it in the frame of hope that says, I am a prisoner of hope. Even though I grieve, I know that one day all will be returned to me. All that I've lost will come back. I'm a prisoner of hope. I'm like stretching back to Zechariah's generation, to during the conquest of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, all the way to the people crying out for deliverance in Egyptian slavery, saying, we are prisoners of hope. We are joining the long chain of God's people all through history who could not be deterred by war, pestilence, violence, being conquered. You name it, God's people have experienced it, and yet they experienced hope. And just as each generation, so too do we join and say, even now, even today, especially in the age of despair, we will hold to hope. We will announce and proclaim that hope, and we will come to the table together. For Jesus said, until I come again, eat this meal in anticipation of the meal of when I make all things right and all things new. Until then, may you continue in hope. Let's pray. Father, as we come to the table today, we do so as prisoners of hope, longing for you to come and fix and heal this broken world, longing for you to do what only you can do, to send your Son back to us and to restore all things just as he promised he would. So, Lord, for those of us who are struggling to find hope, may we be imprisoned by the hope, as many generations before and many generations in the future have, of trusting you in your word. May we have an enduring hope, and may that hope bring hope to Redlands and the Inland Empire and the whole world. For this is good news, not just for us, but for the world. Thank you for sending your Son Jesus to us. And as we now come to the table to receive his body and blood, may you bless us that we might both receive the consolation of the gospel, but also to bring the consolation of the gospel to the hurting around us. Amen. Come to the table.